think at long last, my friend, we are good to go. Sorry, everyone, for the technical difficulties. It would not be a convention without technical difficulties, which I know from yesterday when my webcam did not work. But
who
now
left
that's
the
working.
Gremlins to the Kaiju convention? I'm just saying.
That's a good question. All right, let's get the show on the road. We've got a little bit less time to do this now, and there's a lot to talk about. Introduce yourself,
I know,
my man.
It's mildly annoying.
It's all good. We're gonna have some fun.
am Nathan Marchand, I'm Nathan Marchand, a published author and the host of the Monster Island Film Vault podcast.
And I am Daniel DiManna, super toy collecting kaiju nerd. Oh, I want to go this way. And author/creator of the Godzilla Novelization Project. There you go. That's me.
So, of course, a pair of writers who love kaiju would jump in to talk about continuity in the Showa Era Toho movies.
Yeah. It's kind of an incredibly dense topic. The original MCU is a pretty good descriptor of what we're going to talk about here, because again, we're all fans here. We all know about the Showa era. We all know about how the films sometimes connect very well, and sometimes it's a little tenuous at best. But the general, acceptance.
Yeah, I saw somebody in the chat during the Kaiju Cast party last night say that Universal technically did it first, and I would say their continuity is even looser than Toho's.
It's looser. It is the first cinematic universe, for sure. But again, there are things that don't quite line up, and that's because, again,
Daniel, I can't hear you.
Oh, you can't hear me, huh? Oh boy,
Daniel.
I'm talking. Can anybody hear me? Oh, technical difficulties. All right. Well, can I be heard is the real question. If I can be heard, I'm gonna kind of go ahead while Nate figures out his technical difficulties. Let's see. Can I be heard?
Daniel, I can't hear you.
I can hear you. This is going well. This is going swimmingly, isn't it?
Well, hey guys, how's it going? It's Kyle from the Kaiju Cast here.
Kyle from the Kaiju Cast. Thank you for happening by.
Well, I just happened to stumble across this panel room, and So I guess the question I would have for you, real quick, is Danny. Everybody can hear you, no problem. Nathan, wonderful. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you, but I can't hear Danny.
I'm very confused about what's going on. Man, how should we proceed with this?
That's a great question. Nathan, are you still having problems hearing
Yes.
That's really weird.
That is bizarre. That is bizarre.
What kind of technology gods did you anger before you hopped into the studio here today?
The wrong ones.
Don't know.
It's so weird because everything seems like it should be working totally just fine. Like, I can hear Danny, I can hear Nathan, Nathan can hear me, Danny can hear me, but for some reason, the two panelists are just unable to communicate. That's not good.
Apparently, we're not talking to each other today. I don't know.
Yeah. I'm communicating to you through intermediaries right now. Well, I guess what we can do is we can we throw up the slideshow and then just alternate?
We can. I tell you what, I'm gonna pop myself back off the screen, but I still have the headphones in. So if you guys need my help again, I'll try and jump back in. But
Oh, good gravy. So here's what I think we'll try to do.
Well, this is going to be interesting.
Yeah. Let's go ahead. Let's go ahead and go.
Would have wanted to do.
Yeah. Let's go ahead and go to the next slide.
Everything was perfect last night. Why does everything hate me?
It's all good. We'll go to the next slide. Here's what we'll do. We'll go to the next slide.
Okay, so go to the next slide, Nathan. Oh my gosh, I don't know about this. This is weird.
Go ahead and go to the next slide.
Yeah,
I'll take it. I'll go ahead and take it. And then
talking about the continuity of these movies, we have to set up some ground rules while we're doing this. One is we are going to stick with what the films are actually telling us. We are going off of what they actually say in there, so they dictate the ground rules of the continuity, and we're going to play by that. This is not going to be a bunch of fan theories to try to put them all together. But there are some points where we're going to have to do some extrapolations, and where we have extrapolations, we'll be sure to let you know. All right, Dan, I'll let you take the next bullet point.
All right. Production year versus chronological year. Now, this is kind of an interesting one because most of the time it's generally assumed that the films could or do take place in the year they were made. And just for simplicity's sake, we are assuming that that is kind of a rule going across the board unless otherwise stated in the film, because there are cases like Frankenstein Conquers the World, which was made in 1965, but takes place in 1960. And then there's the whole 1960X thing from Monster Zero. So that's a little bit of a gray area. And wherever we come in, we encounter those gray areas, we will also be sure to let you know. Your turn, Nate.
All right, Nathan, it's your turn to go now. I don't want to sit here and play ping pong with you guys throughout the panel, though.
No, I don't blame you.
I know. I don't understand what's going on. I mean, I've got my... Oh, my gosh. Anyway, so we're also going to have realistic expectations, which we probably should have set for this panel. So there are continuity errors everywhere in this universe. You have to understand, we're calling this the original MCU, but Toho didn't set out to create this grand universe. They did it very organically. It evolved over time from film to film. So there's going to be cracks in this continuity. And it's not necessarily a slight against the movies or this era, but or the people who made them. They just, they were not being as much a stickler for the continuity as they were going on. Your turn, Danny.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm gonna do the next two so we can move along. Accepting the impossible. This is an insane universe, and in order to say that a lot of these films are connected, you kind of have to go along with the fact that cities tend to get rebuilt very quickly. That's just how it works. There might be multiple undersea civilizations. Alien invasions happen all the time. It's just the nature of the way that the films were made. They were not made to be a cohesive universe starting with film number 1 and moving through 26 or 27, however movies that we included in this. So those little bits where you say, okay, well, this is the 14th alien invasion, that's just part of the fun. And you have to kind of go along with it. And then, that's what everyone loves about these things. And then of course, the big rule, have fun. Because this is all for fun. This uses facts, but it's also got some opinion stuff in it and just how we approached it. This is not some kind of set in concrete Showa universe, but it's how we interpreted it. And if anyone has other ways of looking at it or other suggestions, that's awesome. Like, talk to us about that kind of stuff because we think it's really, really cool how it could all go together in different ways. Next slide.
All right, you're up, Nathan.
Okay. But, and ultimately, I mean, I wish I could know what Danny was saying. I'll just have to accept this by faith at this point. We're here to have
hang
some
on.
fun.
I can actually, because I can for some reason hear the two of you. What did you have a question for Danny? Because I think he did 2 slides, right?
I did
Danny?
2 slides just so we could move it along.
So skip to 2 slides from now, right?
Oh, okay. 2 slides from now?
Yeah, we're at ground rule. Yeah,
Okay.
This is all that community building I was talking about, you guys.
Intermediary. I don't understand. It worked for 2 minutes and then it died.
And the Japanese have a saying, shogunai, which means it can't be helped. So it can't be helped. Let's just move along with it. I will be happy to pass it from one to the other. So
I think the French say "c'est la vie,"
Sure, yeah. So I guess Nathan, go ahead with this slide, and then when you're ready, Danny will know when you're ready to pass it to him, but you won't know when Danny's done. So
we'll do it slide by slide. I think that's what we'll do. Danny can hear me. When I go to the next slide, you do this one, and then when you're done, I'll do the next one. Okay. So we skipped over all of the prehistory stuff that Danny has so meticulously chronicled because this is an outpouring of his project on the GNP to have a timeline for all the different universes of Godzilla films. So, all the prehistory stuff out of the way. The way we're looking at this is that the defining moments, the things that really started to change things, happened in 1945 with the bombings of Hiroshima and Nagasaki. Those are at least alluded to in these films. And then 1954 when you have the Castle Bravo test and the Lucky Dragon 5 incident, which is funny because I didn't think necessarily that the Lucky Dragon number 5 happened in universe. It's a historical event, But Danny's research has apparently panned out that it did actually happen. But the boat that we see at the beginning of Godzilla 54 was inspired by that real world event. It was not the same event.
Ta-da, my turn. All right, and then after that, this isn't something, like whenever we get to slides like this, we can pretty much breeze right through them because we don't need to tell you guys the plots of these movies. We can safely assume that you've seen these movies anywhere from once to several hundred times. So, Godzilla in 1954, that's the big moment. If you really want to do MCU comparisons, Iron Man, that's it. But, you know, it's an interesting starting point for it because, again, as we go on, you'll see how the universe itself starts to open up and get wider if you choose to interpret all these films as one kind of connected continuity. The next year, 1955, was an interesting one. Obviously, the second Godzilla film needs to happen. Godzilla raids again. But we also decided to include the events of Half Human. It's an interesting little story. It doesn't really have any incidents in it that could negate it being in the larger Showa universe. It's kind of a very insular, small story more than anything else. And one of the big reasons that I decided to include it in my timeline research for my GMP project is the fact that the snowman character, or at least the presence of snowman, abominable snowman, are referenced as being feasible by a line from Dr. Yamane in the original Godzilla. He mentioned snowman footprints. So I didn't really see a reason that it should be excluded. And so I threw it in the timeline because why not? It's a good little movie. Next slide.
You're up, Nathan. Next slide.
Okay. All right. By the way, Kyle, in the chat, you have been dubbed Father of Ultra because of this. Okay, so
Our hero.
After those defining moments, the 50s continue. We have more kaiju showing up. So 1956, we have Rodan. 1958, we have Varan. And then, interestingly, even though the movie came out in 1965, the events of the film actually take place in 1960 with Frankenstein Conquers the World, which actually helps out with some potential continuity hiccups once we get to War of the Gargantuas here in a few minutes.
And this is a little section that I decided to include here just based on all of the research that I did going into this project. Because, again, a lot of the Showa research stuff and timeline stuff is something I've been working on for years. And so this is just a list of films from the 1950s that are tokusatsu and or kaiju, science fiction, fantasy, from that decade that I decided for one reason or another to exclude from at least this version of the timeline. Among them are The Three Treasures, Invisible Man, the Mutant Trilogy, and I struggled a little bit with Mysterians and Battle in Outer Space, because I think that with a little bit of tweaking here and there, they could very easily fit into the timeline. Especially in how the technology to fight the aliens progresses from Markolite to to atomic heat ray to maser. I think there's a very clear through line there, but just for the sake of simplicity for this particular version of the timeline, we decided to leave those films out. Next, Nate.
All right, here we go. So now we get to the 60s, and this is when things really start to ramp up. So we already had the events of Frankenstein. So now, 1961, we have Mothra. And then we have King Kong versus Godzilla. So that's interesting that Godzilla was gone for about 7 years. And we had all of these other kaiju popping up in this universe in the interim. And then he shows back up in 1962 to battle Kong. And then 1963 was a little bit of a kind of a busy year, but it was with two smaller monster stories when you had, well, I should say Matango smaller, Atragon not so much. But we have Matango and Atragon, which are two of my favorite kaiju films, I might add.
And this is where we come across our first headcanon chunk of the presentation, as I like to say. I like to call it the several undersea civ scenario because I like alliteration. And so we have to kind of accept that if we throw Atragon into this continuity, and I think it fits, I think if for no other reason than Manda being in the film, you kind of have to rationalize the fact that two undersea civilizations have to exist in the same universe. You've got Mu, and you have Seatopia from Godzilla vs. Megalon. Now, again, this was not something that was planned at the time. It's not like they looked back and said, "Oh, well, we already did Atragon and Mu, so we can't do undersea civilizations again." It just didn't work like that. This was a universe of films that evolved organically and naturally. So this is where we have to have a little fun with it. Could Seatopia be related to Mu in some way? Could they be a splinter group? Could they have split off from? Could one have split off from the other? Presumably Seatopia from Mu, because Mu is, by all accounts, much bigger than Seatopia. It would seem. Is it possible that Seatopia was a colony of Mu? How are they related, if they are related at all? Maybe they were two completely different civilizations that were sunk by the same cataclysm. But then there's the question of why they have similar technology. They both have artificial suns that they developed. So how does that work? There is no answer in quote unquote canon here. So this is where you have to kind of use your imagination a bit and speculate. And that's part of the fun. Next.
All right, Nathan, you're up.
Yeah. I'm starting to notice that doing it this way, Danny gets all of the really meaty slides.
Oh.
Adam says I should get Jimmy to help me. I wish, man. I wish.
All right.
Okay, wait. There we go.
There we go.
Wow. I don't get to say, but like I said, Danny, you get all the fun slides.
Tell him he can do the next slide.
But no, the undersea civilization thing, I will add, was one of the first places where we kind of had to fan theorize a little bit. But again, we're only going off of things that we see in the movies, so we're not going too far off the beaten path because we don't want to inject too much fan theory into this. We want to keep working with these films on their terms. So 1964 is actually a really busy year. Now, you would think there would actually be three major events in this because in 1964, Toho released three Kaiju movies: Mothra vs. Godzilla, Dogora, and then Ghidorah the Three-Headed Monster. However, as we'll see in the next slide, the Ghidorah the Three-Headed Monster technically doesn't take place in 1964. The movie was released in December of that year, but take it away, Danny.
Dialogue in the very beginning of the film from Naoko states that the events are taking place in January. And if we're to assume that Mothra vs. Godzilla took place in 64, then naturally Ghidorah the Three-Headed Monster must be taking place in January of 65, which also means that that's the year of the Exilian invasion and the events of Monster Zero, maybe. Now, this is where we had to kind of fudge things a little bit, because, again, there is no specific year given for the events of this film in the film, just a decade-long gap where it could take place, 1960X. It's possible to move this film later on into the timeline, anywhere between 1965 and 1969, so that there's basically a 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, a 5-year potential opening for this film to fit in. For the sake of this particular timeline, we decided to keep it in 1965 for the ease of moving things forward. But I will say one of the reasons that we excised Battle in Outer Space from this timeline is because of that, because that film is another case of a movie taking place in a year that was not the year it was made. Made in 59, takes place in 65. If Monster Zero takes place in 65, that's two big alien invasions in 1 year. And it's possible to move things around and get a timeline out of that. But again, just for the sake of simplicity and brevity for this presentation, we decided to keep Monster Zero in its current location. And that's entirely debatable, but that's just how we decided to proceed with it. Next
slide, Nate.
Okay. I don't know if you saw this, Danny, but Malefic King just brought up that the thing about there being two King Kongs. We're about to get into that.
Yes, we are. Good observation.
There
it is.
Yes, we are actually arguing that there are two King Kongs in this universe. So here's our actual evidence from the movies to go along with this. For one thing, we know in King Kong versus Godzilla and King Kong Escapes, they're not the same Kongs because their heights and stats are different. The one in King Kong Escapes is much smaller. There is dialogue in King Kong Escapes that would lead you to believe, well, no, they flat out say it, that Kong can easily swim from one island to the next. So our theory, is that they're probably not limited to just one island. So what we're theorizing is that the Kong species originated on one island, one particular island, but then they started swimming around, migrating to different islands, and then through succeeding generations, they spread all around the South Pacific, and then thanks to the unique ecologies of wherever they're living, it affected them differently. So, for example, Faroe Island with the much larger Kong, we're guessing that he's a heck of a lot larger because magic red berry juice. It probably gave him some serious growth spurts. So that's our theory at this point. And probably also considering that there have only been 2 of these things seen in the movie so far. So it's possible that perhaps all the rest of them may have died out. Who knows? Or maybe they just haven't found anymore.
All right. That was the Kong diaspora theory, as I like to call it. We had fun putting that one together. As the 60s continue, things continue to get even more complicated. Now, War of the Gargantuas is an interesting case because if we include Frankenstein, we got to include this one, even though they're semi-sequels. One is definitely carrying on from the other one. Now, the interesting thing is that the films were obviously made about a year apart. Frankenstein was 65, this one was 66. If you want to include this in the timeline, because again, I think it's kind of easy to miss the fact that Frankenstein Conquers the World takes place in 1960 instead of the year it was produced in 65. And if you look at it from that perspective, the stuff that they say in War of the Gargantuas about there being a little baby creature that escapes roughly a year after it was found, and then grows big and comes back, like that would all have to take place within a year, like of those two films. So that wouldn't make sense. But placing Frankenstein Conquers the World in its accurate time slot of 1960, there's now 5 years for the Sanda to be born, created, come into the world in some way, be raised in the lab, escape, have his cells be torn off, and then those cells develop into Gyra, and then the war ultimately happens in 66 when the battle is fought and the brothers seemingly perish at the end of the film. And then, of course, we have Sea Monster as well, which it's arguable that film could be either before or after Monster Zero, but since we decided to put Monster Zero first, we're keeping the films in order in this case. And then the next year is obviously Son of Godzilla. And as we mentioned before, King Kong Escapes. Next slide, Nate.
All right. I just want to bring up real quick. Malefic King actually brought up an interesting point. He would argue that King Kong is not a name given to him by the natives. It's actually a cultural name. I like that idea.
Oh, that's really cool. I need to read these comments.
It's actually good that this one has landed to me because of my podcast. So, we have Monster Island and we have Monsterland. How do you reconcile these two? Well, there's a couple different ways you can look at this, and these theories are not necessarily original to us. These actually, a couple of these at least, are theories that have floated around in the fandom for a little while. So, you have the first, which we're calling the same island theory. The island's called Monster Island. The island called Monster Island in the 70s films is actually the same island in Ogasawara that becomes Monsterland in 1999 during Destroy All Monsters, which is personally the theory that I adhere to as a fan and on my podcast, since the podcast is actually set on Monster Island. There's also the theory that it's a different island, which I think this is what Danny is going with the GNP, which is that the island that we see up until Megalon is a different island than in 1973, if depending on how you want to interpret the dialogue in the narration at the beginning of Megalon. That island is destroyed by nuclear tests, and the monsters move to Monster Island in Ogasawara. This one is interesting. I came across this while wandering around Wikizilla for a while, because I think this is how they reconcile a lot of things. And that's that Salgel Island from Son of Godzilla, Monster Island, and let me see. Oh, that Monster Island and Salgel Island are all the same place. So what happened was that Silico Island gets frozen. It eventually thaws out, and that's Monster Island. All the monsters start hanging out there. I'll let Danny handle this since he can hear me, but I can hear him. I forget if Toho is then supposed to be all of them. I don't think it is because it's not Ogasawara. Okay, no. He's shaking his head. That's good to know.
All right, moving on. This is kind of funny. In my research on the Showa timeline, I, as one inevitably does, I came to Latitude Zero. I've included it here for literally no other reason than that I find it hilarious that this film could be included, because again, it's a relatively small scale story, except for the fact that there's a giant a third potential underwater civilization, but it really doesn't have that much of an impact on the timeline as a whole. I found it to be, like, in terms of its impact on a potential timeline, thoroughly innocuous. It's just there. And so I said, there's no reason to include it. There's no reason to exclude it. Why not? It brings me joy. So I threw it on there. And we're also including Space Amoeba, because again, there's really, it's another kind of insular story. There's not a lot in there that could negate other events. So we threw it in there because it doesn't hurt to do so. Next slide.
Okay. I just want to point out that I didn't know the Griffin was a podcaster, because this cannon looks an awful lot like a mic. I'm just saying. Griffin cast. There you go. So movies that we left out, and I saw someone during the Kaiju cast party bring this up last night. He said, how do you reconcile Gorath? And we reconcile it by not including it. Because it doesn't work.
Is what it is.
It's too many crazy things happen. The moon gets destroyed. They move the Earth. It's too nuts, and it doesn't fit in with everything else. And we're leaving out All Monsters Attack, Godzilla's Revenge, whatever you want to call it, because it's not in this universe. We would argue that it's actually set in our world, where all of the monsters are fictional characters. So we left that one out. Now, well, we'll talk a little bit about Gorath and Mysterians and Battle in Outer Space, because we're leaving them out, but there are several, those movies plus one other one could potentially be connected onto themselves and be their own little universe.
Entirely possible. All right, now we get into the psychedelic 70s. And again, these are all things that y'all know the events of these films. Hedorah happens in 71. Gigan happens in 72. 73 is an interesting case because that is obviously Megalon, and it's also the point in the timeline where arguably, according to certain Toho publications, all the big destruction we see on Monster Island in this film results in the island being pretty much destroyed and uninhabitable, which is why I subscribe to the multiple island theory, because it seems to me pretty obvious that this film shows Monster Island getting pretty much destroyed, which necessitates the move to Ogasawara. But the other thing that we needed to include in here, drum roll please, Zone Fighter. We got to have Zone Fighter. Zone Fighter it's one of those things that some people will argue over its canonicity, but for my money, it's just too much fun to not include. There's nothing in it that negates anything else to a significant degree. The two potential sticking points that could have been a problem were including Gigan and King Ghidorah. Gigan gets, spoiler alert, remarkably, astoundingly murdered in Zone Fighter, and does not appear later on in the Showa universe in any way, so that lines up. King Ghidorah is one of the few monsters in the Zone Fighter series that doesn't get killed. He gets his neck broken and he flies away. And he has to, because eventually he has to come back for Destroy All Monsters. So there's no reason to not throw that in there. 1973 was very busy, it would seem. Next slide.
I muted myself. Next slide.
Okay. Someone wants you to do next slide like you're the announcer in a Japanese movie trailer.
What's the next slide?
There we go.
There we go.
Hang on. That would be Mechagodzilla Shudai.
That's it.
There you go.
Oh, that's awesome.
I like it. All right. So, well, continuing with the 70s, we get to 1974, the Godzilla versus Mechagodzilla. And then it comes, well, this era as part of this timeline comes to an end on Terror of Mechagodzilla, and apparently my laptop wants to die.
We're almost done anyway.
This just keeps getting better and better.
It really does. All right. Keeping it brisk now, since now we have a dead battery to tend to. Excised films from the 70s. This is a pretty straightforward lineup of films: Bloodthirsty Trilogy, Sayonara Jupiter, Princess from the Moon, Gunhead. The one interesting one that might be slightly up for debate is War in Space. The War in Space, I felt, didn't really have a nice place to fit in with the story of the whole thing, so I left it out. But this is another discussion for another day. But if you really want to get into the nitty gritty of the minutia of it, Gorath might fit with War in Space. Again, probably not intentionally, but there are a lot of people out there that claim that they are in the same universe for the simple fact that you do not see the moon in the War in Space. And the moon gets blowed up real good in Gorath. So again, it's not part of this timeline, but it could very well be part of another one. Next
slide, please, Nate.
Okay. I tried to plug the laptop in, but it doesn't want to charge. It wants to be stupid today.
Of course it doesn't want to
charge. All right. Did Danny mention the thing about War in Space? How it's connected to the 3 other movies? Okay. Yeah, that would make my producer very happy. So, the grand finale, because this movie, released in 1968, takes place actually in 1999, because I don't know if Danny mentioned this or not, but we're assuming that unless otherwise stated, the movies take place in the year that they were released. This is obviously an exception. So this is where it all culminates. This, if we're talking about in terms of MCU comparisons, this is the Avengers of Toho Kaiju films. Maybe even, I don't know if it would be the original Avengers or if it would be Endgame. I mean, you could go either way on this. It's a huge deal. And then, this is the complete list of all the movies that we have at least in our minds, included in the canon of the Toho cinematic universe. And I believe that's the final slide, isn't it, Danny?
That is, in fact, the last slide.
We've got a little bit of time, but
I was just going to say, you do have a little bit of time. You have about 10 minutes before the end. Because you guys are having an issue with the hearing of stuff, I think what I would probably do, since Danny is able to hear you, Nathan, you should see if there's any, comments or questions that you want to address from the chat, if you can see that.
Okay, that's what I will do then.
Yeah, go ahead and do that, and then
all right, take it away, Danny. I'll handle the questions.
All right. What am I taking away?
You're just taking away the attention from all the people in the chat, I guess.
I'm taking all the attention away. Well, let's see.
Here, let me help.
Yes.
Okay. I'd say Ghidorah's the Avengers, while Destroy All Monsters is Endgame. Actually, that's not a bad way to look at it. I kind of like that.
I agree.
Doesn't Terror Mechagodzilla take place in 1974, since the narrator says in the beginning that the Interpol started weeks after release in March of 74? That's a good question. I'm not sure. I'm going to defer that to Danny because he's done way more research, and my laptop died.
Well, you didn't need to keep the slide open anyway, so you're probably all good.
All right. Can you repeat that question?
Anyway, I'll let Danny handle that because he's done more research on the actual timeline than I have.
Ooh, now this is a good question. Are we referring to the dub or the sub? Terror Mechagodzilla narrator says beginners weeks after the event. That's actually a good point. Now, again, it's going to depend on if it's the dub or the sub, because I honestly don't recall which version said that. Maybe both said that. If that's the case, then I missed that, which would put Terror Mechagodzilla in 1974. Two Nick Adams.
How do you explain the two Nick Adams?
This is a really...
Well, Danny has a fun theory about that.
I do.
And all the other actors who get recycled in those movies.
Yeah, this is something that is kind of a running joke in the timeline that I'm developing. So, brief backstory: as part of the Godzilla Novelization Project, there we go. Gotta plug myself there. As part of the GNP, I'm doing these very in-depth timelines for all the Godzilla film eras, and when I mean in-depth, I mean like I'm getting into the nitty-gritty. I right now have a MonsterVerse one. They're all still in development. They get stuff published, so it's not complete yet. But a MonsterVerse one for the anime timeline, which is like a really popular page on my website. And then I have one for Sony as well for the Geno stuff. And the Showa timeline is one I've been working on for a long time because, again, it's very, very complicated. And one of my favorite things about it is the fact that if you put all these films into the same universe, that you have to accept the fact that there's like 5 or 6 people running around that look just like Akira Takarada. And there's like, I don't know, like a couple dozen Kenji Saharas, a lot of Akiko Aradas, and at least, as you say, 2 Nick Adams. And that's just part of the fun of it. I mean, all of it's fun. It's the same thing. Nate brought up the Universal films earlier, which I'm also a big fan of. And it's basically, if you're familiar with the original classic black and white Universal monster films, if I name drop Lionel Atwill or Dwight Fry, you'll know what I'm talking about, because those 2 actors were in almost all of just the Frankenstein movies between 31 and the end of the run in the 40s. So if you can accept the fact that there are like 4 or 5 Dwight Frys and probably more Lionel Atwills running around, people that look just like that. There are a couple Kumi Mizunos. There are a couple of Takashi Shimuras. It's just part of the fun. And one of the gags on the actual timeline page is one of the things I'm including is character birthdays. That's how insanely in depth this is. And I'm calculating them based on actor ages. And whatever year Takarada-san was born, I don't recall what year that was. Literally, that entire year is just stacked top from bottom with this guy is born, this guy is born, this guy is born. But it's all Takarada-san's characters, and that's when you have to plant your tongue firmly in your cheek when you're working on a project like this, because if you take it too seriously, it just falls apart and it stops being fun. So that's where I come down on that. All right. More comments. Zone Fighter truly defeated Gigan. Gigan doesn't get to run away. No, he certainly does not. Let's see. Happy knowing Zone Fighter is included in the I'm very happy Zone Fighter is included in the continuity. I love Zone Fighter. It's one of those things that needs a release in America desperately. With all of the tokusatsu and Henshin Hero stuff that's coming out right now, maybe Toho will, decide that it needs to happen, because I would super duper buy that. I'm pretty sure everyone here would. And if anyone out there hasn't seen Zone Fighter, it is track downable. So I'd recommend finding it no matter what. It's super good. Let's see. Comments. I'm seeing a lot of very supportive comments here for all of our technical difficulties. The end of the laptop. All of this was interesting. Thank you, Chris. Good job, guys. Thank you, Robert. My buddy Robert. Let's see. This was great. Yeah, thank you, guys. The TCU G Team 2. That's good. The TCU. We should have called it that. Let's see. What else do we have around here? We got a lot of awesome people saying awesome things. Thank you guys for sticking with us, even though this has been a technical super happy fun times.
Yeah, I don't know if you guys can see this, but there's been about you've had almost 100 people watching this whole time. So
yeah, I saw it. That's
good, despite all of the technological hiccups, to say the least.
Yes,
everyone's enjoying the Danny DiManna show at this point. So.
No. The real show's behind me. I got all the toys.
I can't tell what you're saying, Danny, but I'm assuming you're being far too humble, like you always are. So
probably, yeah.
He's essentially telling you to wrap it up, Nathan, because we got to get going.
Yeah,
I know.
I'm saying we've got about.
I know. This has been an unmitigated disaster as far as I care.
It's all good.
All right, I guess this will be a good point since we're wrapping up here. Let's just chill our stuff, I guess, Danny. So. Again, I'm Nathan Marchand, the host of the Monster Island Film Vault podcast. Please, check us out on MonsterIslandFilmVault.com. We're on all the social medias and all the podcatchers. We're on YouTube as well. So if you see the Monster Island Film Vault pop up in any of the chats for the rest of the weekend, that's me. I'm operating that. And feel free to subscribe to the podcast through there as I put the audio up on there. And also, I am a published author. I even have a kaiju book, and I have about, 6 or 7 other books to my name. The Nathan Marchand, and my author site is nathanjsmarchand.com. Feel free to check all of that stuff out as well.
All right, I'm gonna go.
Yeah, I'm done. It's your turn.
Okay. All right, my turn, real quick, and then we'll get out of here. As I mentioned before, my name's Daniel DiManna, and I am the author of and creator of the Godzilla Novelization Project, a potentially ridiculous endeavor on my part to fully novelize all of the Japanese Godzilla films and share them 100% free with you lovely people, the fans. The website where you can read the books that are currently being published chapter by chapter is www.godzillanovelizationproject.wordpress.com. Hopefully, in the very near future, the .wordpress part will be gone because thanks to my Patreon supporters, all of whom I adore so much, and really, it's really humbling that people are supporting me on this. I will be able to get a better looking website and one that's not free and janky looking. If you want to chat with me or talk to me about the project, ask me questions, anything like that, just shoot the breeze about Godzilla. I love to do that. Obviously, look at this room. You can find me on Twitter at Danzilla93_GNP. The Godzilla Novelization Project is also on Facebook. And if you go to the website, there's a contact page where you can email me as well. Sometimes people just email me and say, hey, my favorite Godzilla movie is this. What's yours? And I love that. So I love engaging with fans. Feel free to reach out to me and, tell me I'm super cool or super lame. Tell me that I'm doing a good job or accuse me of ruining your childhood. Criticism is welcome as well. So yes. I just I just love to have fun with Godzilla. That's my thing. So Godzilla Novelization Project. Check it out if you are so inclined. And on that note, I think it's about time we wrap this up and let the next crew get in. That's what I say. Thank you guys for joining us for this ridiculously insane, broken panel. And thank you.
I'm just waiting for you to stop talking, Danny, because I don't know when we're gonna stop it.
Yeah, I'm thanking Kyle. I'm thanking Kyle right now. Thank you, Kyle. Oh my gosh.
You're welcome. You're both very welcome.
You saved our butts. I don't know what kind of crazy gremlins are going on.
Kyle, father of Ultra Yount. I love it.
Yes, all bless you, my man. I think we're good. Let's wrap this up. Thank you, everyone, for watching. Thank you, Kyle. Thank you, Nate. Let's continue enjoying KaijuCon Line.
Enjoy. Oh, yeah, and don't forget the next panel is Dore Krause's Q&A on the KaijuCast channel.
Exciting.
See you guys for that. Later.